Welcome to our deep dive today.
Oh, yeah.
We're exploring the historical accounts surrounding Aisha's age at the time of her marriage to the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay.
It's a topic that sparks a lot of discussion, and we want to approach it with respect for all perspectives. We'll be examining various sources, from prominent Islamic scholars to historical texts, primarily focusing on the works of Sunni scholars.
Right.
Get ready for some intriguing insights that may challenge what you thought you knew.
It's fascinating how history can be interpreted in so many ways.
Exactly. You always hear that Aisha was 9 years old when she married the Prophet Muhammad.
Right, and that narrative often stems from certain hadith, the sayings and traditions attributed to the Prophet Muhammad.
Okay, so that's the common narrative, but there are other viewpoints that challenge this timeline. In fact, Aisha herself mentions in a quote that she felt no jealousy towards Khadija, the Prophet's first wife, because he spoke of her so often.
Yeah.
And,
That's a very important point. She goes on to say that the Prophet married her 3 years after Khadija's death. This is key, because we know the Prophet married Khadija in the year 13 of his mission.
So if we follow Aisha's account, their marriage would happen in the year 16 of the Prophet's mission.
Precisely. And this is where the timeline gets really interesting. The Hijra, the Prophet's migration from Mecca to Medina, marks the year 1 of the Islamic calendar. And there's a 13-year gap between the start of the Prophet's mission and the Hijra.
So Aisha's marriage in the year 16 of the mission would actually be in the year 3 AH, after Hijra.
Yes, but there's another layer to this. Islamic scholar al-Baladhuri, in his book Ansab al-Ashraf, states that Sauda, another wife of the Prophet, was his only wife for 4 years after Khadija.
So applying that to Aisha's marriage pushes the date to the year 4 AH.
Right. We're already seeing some variation in the timeline. Now, let's look at Aisha's age through her sister Asma bint Abi Bakr. Many scholars, like Abu Nu'am al-Isfahani, at-Tabarani, Ibn Asakir, Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, and an-Nawawi, agree that Asma was born 27 years before the Hijra.
Meaning she was 27 years old in the year 1 AH. And here's a key piece of information. Many sources, including al-Bayhaqi, al-Dahabi, and Ibn Asakir, state that Asma was 10 years older than Aisha.
So if Asma was 27 in the year 1 AH and Aisha was 10 years younger, Aisha would have been 17 in the year 1 AH.
And if she married the Prophet in the year 4 AH, as some accounts suggest, she would have been 21 years old at the time.
Exactly. That paints a very different picture. Now let's delve into another interesting detail. Several sources mentioned Aisha was engaged to another man named Jubayr ibn Mut'im before her marriage to the Prophet.
That's significant because being engaged suggests she was already considered of marriageable age by her family and community even before her marriage to the Prophet.
Absolutely. And to add to that, there's an account that Aisha's father, Abu Bakr, attempted to arrange her marriage to Jubayr before migrating to Abyssinia, which is modern-day Ethiopia, 8 years before the Hijra.
So if Abu Bakr was arranging Aisha's marriage 8 years before the Hijra, it implies she was likely considered of marriageable age during that time. This is fascinating how these different accounts create a different picture than the one we often hear.
It really shows how examining multiple sources and perspectives can give us a much deeper understanding of historical events.
And that's what makes this deep dive so intriguing. We're just scratching the surface here. There's so much more to explore.
We'll be back with part 2, where we'll uncover even more evidence and perspectives on this complex historical issue. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the historical accounts surrounding Aisha's age at the time of her marriage to the Prophet Muhammad.
It's fascinating to consider all the different pieces of the puzzle and how they fit together.
Exactly. In the last part, we talked about some sources suggesting Aisha might have been older than the commonly known narrative.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's crucial to understand the social and cultural norms of 7th century Arabia.
Right.
It's a very different time than today.
That's a vital point. Some argue that the very concept of childhood and adulthood wasn't the same as our modern understanding.
That's interesting. So you're saying age may not have been the determining factor for marriage back then?
It was different, yeah. Some scholars suggest that physical maturity and the ability to contribute to the household were more important in determining readiness for marriage.
So it wasn't just about how old you were, but about social and cultural factors too. That makes sense. How do these cultural considerations relate to Aisha's case?
Well, think about Aisha's engagement to Jubayr ibn Mut'im before her marriage to the Prophet. It suggests she was considered of marriageable age within her community.
Right. And we talked about how that engagement likely happened years before her marriage to the Prophet.
Exactly. And remember, Abu Bakr, Aisha's father, attempted to arrange her marriage to Jubayr before migrating to Abyssinia 8 years before the Hijra. This adds another layer to the idea that she was considered eligible for marriage back then.
It's like putting together a complex puzzle. Each piece gives us more information, but it's also important to acknowledge that there are different opinions within the scholarly community. Some still maintain that the traditional account of Aisha being 9 years old at the time of her marriage is accurate.
That's true. Some point to possible variations in the lunar calendar, or different ways of calculating time to explain the discrepancies.
So the way time was measured back then could be a factor.
Yes, and some scholars argue that hadith narrations, the sayings and traditions of the Prophet, might have undergone changes during transmission over time.
So there's the possibility of unintentional errors or misinterpretations.
That's why critical thinking is so important. We need to be aware of the limitations of historical sources and avoid seeing any single narrative as the absolute truth.
This brings us back to the importance of considering all sides and being open to different interpretations.
Our goal isn't to give a definitive answer. It's to explore this complex historical issue in a thoughtful and respectful way, and hopefully give you the information to draw your own conclusions.
It's fascinating how history can challenge our assumptions and encourage us to think critically. In the next part, we'll delve into some additional evidence and perspectives. Stay with us. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive into the historical accounts surrounding Aisha's age at the time of her marriage to the Prophet Muhammad.
We've explored various sources and viewpoints from alternative timelines to the social context of 7th century Arabia.
It's been fascinating to see how different scholars interpret the available evidence, leading to a range of perspectives on this complex topic.
Now, let's step back and consider what we can learn from this deep dive into history. What insights can we apply to our understanding of the past?
That's a great question. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me is the importance of critical thinking when we're looking at historical narratives.
Absolutely. We can't just accept everything we read or hear as the absolute truth. It's crucial to question assumptions, consider different viewpoints, and carefully evaluate the evidence.
It's like being a detective, piecing together clues to get a clearer picture of what happened.
Exactly. And just like in a good detective story, there might not always be a simple, clear-cut answer. History is full of ambiguities and different interpretations.
But that doesn't mean we should give up on trying to understand it. The process of exploring these complexities can be incredibly enriching.
It definitely challenges us to think critically and appreciate the nuances of history. It reminds us that historical accounts are often shaped by the perspectives of those who recorded them.
So we need to be aware of potential biases and approach historical accounts with a discerning eye. It's not just about the facts themselves, but also about how they are presented and interpreted.
And it's also important to be mindful of how these historical narratives are used and interpreted today. Sometimes historical events are invoked to support certain agendas or ideologies, which can be problematic.
That's a really important point. History can be a powerful tool, and it's crucial to use it responsibly and ethically.
That's where education and open dialogue come in. By engaging in thoughtful discussions like the one we're having, we can promote a deeper and more balanced understanding of history and its complexities.
As we wrap up this deep dive, what's the key message you want our listeners to take away from our exploration of this topic?
I think the most crucial takeaway is that history is not static or one-dimensional. It's a constantly evolving narrative shaped by multiple perspectives and interpretations.
And as we've seen, even a seemingly straightforward historical event like Aisha's marriage can be subject to diverse interpretations and ongoing debate.
Absolutely. Rather than shying away from these complexities, we should embrace them as opportunities for learning and growth.
I completely agree. To our listeners, we encourage you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep engaging in these vital conversations. Don't be afraid to dive deep, challenge your own assumptions, and seek out diverse perspectives. That's what makes learning so rewarding.
And who knows, you might uncover some surprising insights along the way.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore. Until then, stay curious and keep those minds engaged.
I've seen a lot of change, been through a lot of pain. Some things are not the same as they were a year ago, but all will be okay. I move on each and every day. The past is where it stays, way back a year ago.